Microsoft Fabric provides a way to do self-service data and analytics, and we've known that for a while. The ability to start doing self-service AI is emerging. It's there now. And in my work, I'll go ahead and flip the next slide here. Yeah, in my work, I look at what type of technologies have been used, what we are using, what we use in the future. My role at the city of Gresham is kind of an IT architect, but that position is kind of changing over the years. And as I work with my team to go across our organization and understand technology needs, that data and analytics, that moving that information forward, that's really important to me. And it kind of goes into my personal foundations in this community and in the SQL community, the Professional Association of SQL Server, PASS. I love that community so much. And I think it's really awesome that Power BI and Microsoft Fabric have kind of joined like the overall data community and kind of started their own. If you've been following Power BI and you haven't really started with Microsoft Fabric, you might be wondering, okay, what's the reason to do Fabric? And what I want to kind of show today is this idea that in the same way that Power BI made data transformation and business intelligence, self-service, and a lot easier, well, Microsoft Fabric is making data engineering and using AI capabilities self-service and a whole lot easier. So my topic today, AI or made easy in Microsoft Fabric, so I've got here, but really it's making your data AI ready, right? And that's what Power BI, Microsoft Fabric, that's what these platforms excel at, is helping people who maybe aren't traditional, database data engineers, maybe database administrators, people who need to be able to take warehousing concepts and like we talked about the OLAP cube, and they need to be able to implement them in a way that allows them to control it. And oftentimes, they're working directly with people who are in Excel or want to see results in Outlook, right? And so from that perspective, as we start to think about, okay, Microsoft Fabric, we're going to be able to take our data and we're going to have that same concept here of we can employ real data engineers, real data scientists, but that self-service nature is going to allow us to start using those capabilities. In the same way that it made it easier to do the warehousing, Microsoft Fabric's making it easier to do the lake housing. And we're going to look today at some technologies that come together to kind of tell a story that helps you work with your data in your organization to make it more capable in this AI-powered world. We're going to try to pick that apart. The reason I chose the topic of retrieval augmented generation, and I'm glad that at the beginning we had a little dive into saying like, okay, who knows what this is, who doesn't? I'm going to refer to it as RAG. It's just its common abbreviation. But I have some slides that we'll go through, not many. Like we're going to spend most of our time today in Microsoft Fabric, but I'll try to explain that. But I really wanted to just kind of start high level. And before we dive into the concepts of AI and RAG and all of these other things, because we're going to see a lot of products today, I just want to thank you all for coming. Like I mentioned, I have a love for SQL and for Microsoft Fabric and for the data communities. This is a way that, from my perspective, we get to come together and talk about, hey, here's what I found in this platform. Here's what I've been doing. It's not always like, okay, here's step 1, 2, 3, and you're going to end at this result that's going to be so great. Oftentimes, we can show things like that, and we have a lot of presentations like that. Sometimes we just like to explore. And for me, I wanted to do one of those sessions today. And so that's really what we're going to be doing, is we're going to be exploring Fabric. And so if you're new to Microsoft Fabric, I'm going to even try to talk about some things that help me guide people from the transition from, say, Power BI into Microsoft Fabric, and also explore some of because this pipeline, this process takes a lot of features from Microsoft Fabric. It's a great way for us to see just to demo a lot of different things. So yeah, there's this template within Fabric I'm going to show in a second, and it does retrieval augmented generation. And the goal of that is to get your data ready for AI. So let's go ahead and dive in. This is a quick agenda. I'm going to kind of start to talk a little bit about RAG and the role and the impact. We'll talk about Microsoft Fabric and the template, go through that pipeline. And the result of that is that we're going to get something called embeddings. We'll talk about how you can utilize that. So let's start here with the role and impact of RAG, retrieval augmented generation. And so I'm not going to try to like put in a bunch of slides about like what RAG is. For those of you that don't know, basically it's this concept that when you use a chatbot, like if you go to ChatGPT or if you're using Copilot, those are using the LLMs, the models, right, on the back end. And those models are composed of layers of neural nets, and those neural nets have all been trained on data. In this case, the data is like human language, all of human language. And so those LLMs, they're really good at answering general questions, and the model has been like fine-tuned to be able to just answer questions naturally. And in the course of answering those questions, though, it doesn't have real-time data, and it doesn't have data from your organization. And so there's something called pre-processing that allows you to help the LLM get that extra context through context injection. And that's really all that RAG is. That's what RAG is entirely about. It's about taking data that might be in unstructured formats and putting it in a format that AI is really that the LLM is ready to I'm saying that wrong. You put it in a format that allows it to see if the content is close to something that your user is asking. And so that's the idea of the retrieval augmented generation, is that you're kind of grabbing that extra context. Like a user is saying, I have a question about dogs, and in your corpus of documents, you have a couple about dogs that it wouldn't be available to the general LLMs, and so it wouldn't know that answer. And so this process, this retrieval augmented generation, is we take our own data, we go ahead and we store it in a vector store, and we do a similarity search that basically allows us to pull that context as the user's asking that question about dogs. It pulls it in, passes it to the LLM, and we'll look at that more. But actually, rather than me try to explain it, I thought, we're talking about Microsoft Fabric. Copilot is the chatbot within Microsoft Fabric. And so I actually think it has a really compelling story about how it works. And if we're going to talk about like, okay, we're trying to like take our data and we're going to put it in a format that we can then feed it to the LLMs, well, that kind of sounds like Copilot, and that kind of sounds like maybe like a Fabric data agent, right? And so what is this RAG process? Like, how does it play into this? And so I'm going to try to drop a few links in our chat today. And these are the types of resources that I go through as I'm trying to understand new products and try to figure out how to use new things in the platform. FabCon just happened. There's a ton of announcements. They have a lot of stuff on Microsoft Learn. If we have some time, we'll talk about them. And it definitely impacts the type of things that I'm presenting today, because I'm talking about built-in native AI functionality, and it's just getting easier and easier all the time. So what I'm going to show you today actually is like getting easier, but this template was rolled out well before FabCon. So anyways, this brings me back to talking about Copilot and Microsoft Fabric, and I absolutely would encourage you guys to come here and read this page. What we're going to look at today is this picture, because where RAG fits into this picture is right here in this concept of grounding. And so just starting from the top, like I mentioned, like a user needs to put in a prompt. And so you get that input prompt. And what's really awesome about the Microsoft Fabric ecosystem, about the platform, about the Microsoft ecosystem in general, is that your user identity, like that token, that token follows you wherever you go. And so one of the things that's really hard about building just any generic chatbot, especially one that like different users need to be able to access, they have like kind of a permission enclave. And Microsoft Graph has this idea of like a semantic index to help it when you're using like Microsoft 365 Copilot. That same concept kind of is followed through into Microsoft Fabric to say, okay, this user is only going to be able to access certain workspaces. They're only going to be able to access certain data, right? And so all of this is built into Microsoft Fabric to use Copilot to pass a prompt, and it does some pre-processing. And I'm still trying to understand exactly like if it generates and where at what part it's generating embeddings. I do believe it embeds like information about the schemas, the metadata that's in here. And so basically what I'm trying to say is when you're using these agents, when you're using these chatbots, they need a way of grounding their answers. So they go and they look at what's in your Microsoft Fabric workspace, they pull that back in, and that's called context. That's that context injection that augments the prompt. And then that's what actually gets sent to the LLM for you to get a response. So, part of me wants to like pause here and say like, okay, is the concept of RAG clear? What I'm going to kind of show you today is that for these components here, what is built into Copilot works really well on structured data. And I hope I can find on this page the list of items that it is able to reach into. But basically, it's semantic models, it's the schemas of like lake houses and SQL Server, and it's in KQL as well, I think. And so basically you're talking about things that you're able to get into a modeled state. And Copilot you can also, there's this whole concept of like the ontology layer and the data agents, and all of those will help your agent, your chat, able to like point to the right data and get that better. The one thing that's missing from this picture is files, documents, massive pieces of text. That's still something that, as far as I can tell, and I'm still trying to understand how, things are evolving. That's still where RAG, retrieval augmented generation, fits into this story. Because if you have, a bunch of PDFs laying around, you want to be able to mash up your questions where Copilot is really good here at, say, and and I should mention, like a lot of this comes down to what tools the agent is able to use. In Copilot, in Fabric, its tools are like writing a SQL query, writing a DAX query, right? And those things can't reach into a PDF, right? So if we can find a way to extract that text and store it in a way, and honestly, if we even just stored it in just general text in Microsoft Fabric, I think the data agent would do pretty well. And if we have time at the end of this, maybe we'll try and demo some of that. But ultimately, the language of AI, and especially if you're working with a team where you're usually you have some data ownership. You need to do your data transformations, you're building some reports, and you're trying to get data-driven decision-making. That's the bread and butter of Power BI. You're extending into Microsoft Fabric now. And a part of that is maybe your organization is trying to actually build their own agents, right? And so a part of that is going to be this retrieval augmented generation. And you may get asked, okay, well, we need our files. We need a way to create embeddings off of these files so that way the similarity search can be done. And I don't want to go into all the specifics of like why all that is needed. I gave a talk last month on SQL Server's native support for vector embeddings and like why embedding text in high dimensional space is required to actually find semantic similarity. The classic indexes can't really do that. Regardless, that's what we're talking about, is making it easier for AI to read your data. And in this case, retrieval augmented generation still plays a role. So this picture does a pretty good job of showing the pieces we're going to look at. Okay, so hopefully that's kind of clear on what we're talking about with retrieval augmented generation. There's a ton of places you can go and get really good information about it. It's essentially just the idea that we're going to provide context about our data to the LLMs before they provide a response. That general concept is called grounding. The methodology we're going to implement today is called retrieval augmented generation. So it's through these things, may have helped if I came to this slide to show, but basically we're just talking about that retrieval step and then the generation step, right? So that's where that comes in is we're going to take the data out of a document. We're going to store those embeddings in a vector store. There's a way to do that similarity search, and then the best, the result with the highest score, the best similarity score, would then get passed on to the prompt. Okay, jumping into Microsoft Fabric. This is where things, I think, start to get fun. But I want to just back up a quick and keep talking a little bit more about why I think Microsoft Fabric is such a good place for us to work with this type of workload. There's competitors out there, and Microsoft Fabric itself is pretty similar to some of those competitors. But if you understand the strengths of Power BI, if you understand the strengths of like Microsoft 365, that's the strength of Microsoft Fabric. And really, if you live in that Microsoft ecosystem, or if a part of your organization relies on it, there's a really compelling business case for why you would use Microsoft Fabric over other things. And that business case is getting better and better all the time. And hopefully I can help make that case today just by showing you, pretty much every user that, like, some of this stuff is kind of complicated, and it would definitely help if you have a programming background, but you can do it. It's not, they kind of give you everything you need. It kind of shows the accessibility of doing something as complicated as retrieval augmented generation in this platform. And it gives us a really great opportunity to show off so many different pieces. So at the highest level, here's what we're going to be doing. And I'm going to go ahead and pause here from our PowerPoint, jump into Fabric, and kind of show each of these pieces in the pipeline. I'm just going to kind of start from scratch and talk about like how I would approach trying to do retrieval augmented generation in Fabric. So let's go ahead and pull it up here. Okay, so we're in a workspace, and I've got the task flow shown right here. And so, part of me, I know this talk is about AI and it's about the RAG, but I do want to just use it as an opportunity to show off a lot of Microsoft Fabric. And if everybody here is like, no, I'm so well versed in Microsoft Fabric, I don't need this, feel free to tell me to move on. But, for me, like, something as basic as understanding this task flow is the secret to understanding why, like, the direction of that Power BI and Microsoft Fabric are moving. Because this is a fairly new thing in Microsoft Fabric and Power BI. And honestly, I'm not 100% which licenses are able to use it and not. I think I've seen it in just Pro workspaces. So I don't even think you need Microsoft Fabric to use task flows. But, I'll just mention, like, look at all these components in this workspace. And Roberto, go ahead. I see you got a hand up.
Yeah, question. So these task flows, like I remember back then, a few 3 years ago, like you used to do like Power Query automations on Power BI, and then they moved that to the cloud platform, to the Power BI portal, and it was initially called data flows. So these task flows is those data flows, or is different?
It's different. Yeah. So this is why, we're trying to get to RAG, but I think it's important to make sure that, everybody understands the platform itself that we're using. So I'm happy to kind of talk about that a second. And honestly, one of the reasons I want to talk about it, I thought about doing a whole talk about this, is that I don't see people using them as effectively as they can. And the easiest way to understand task flows is to actually like have none of them. So yeah, we'll just delete them. That's fine. So I just deleted these task flows, but notice like it didn't delete all of my things, right? So all these things are still here, like, and just to do this RAG pipeline, I mean, I've got a test thing in here, and this is like an extra demo, but all the rest of these are used in the pipeline, right? And so imagine, this is the same kind of like revolution that Power Query had for Excel, where in Excel, you're basically just like trying to remember all these like the steps that you need to run a bunch of Excel formulas and what page to look at when. And you jump into Power Query and now you've just got your steps there, like as a transformation list. It's like, hallelujah, this is the tool I wanted for so long. Well, that's what task flow is in Microsoft Fabric here. It's our ability to say, yeah, I've got a lot of stuff in here, but it'd be nice if they had some organization and I could communicate to people I'm working in the workspace with about like the order of operations. And it's hard to do like a one-to-one because like I'll just open up the RAG pipeline right here and I'll show you like this is where each of those actual individual pieces are getting used is in this pipeline here, right? Like one of the things has to do with this, one of the things has to do with this, and then this is where we're using our SQL database, right? This is a pipeline that is a true this, then that. And you can kind of see that in these arrows here. However, for our task flow, that's not true. Those arrows there's no run button here for task flows. It's more of just a way for you and those working in your workspace to group things and talk about like an order of operations. So I'll get rid of that because it's jumping in there. This is what I want to show though. So when you go into a new workspace, an empty workspace, you can hit this select a pre-designed task flow. And this is a great way to start playing in Microsoft Fabric because it tries to demonstrate for you, what are your workloads? What are you able to do in here? And like I generally tell people to just start with basic data analytics. I think this makes sense in most people's mind that what we're doing is getting data, storing it, visualizing it, and oh, look at that. Now we can track data. That's pretty awesome. One of those huge advantages from continuing your evolution from Power BI to Microsoft Fabric is all these new tools that you get. They really round out your experience of data transformation and just like handling data for analytics. And it brings these tools that like cloud platforms have, like programmers have been using cloud platforms for a long time. They bring them in here as like kind of, they're supposed to be like first-class products for you to use. And so, some of these workloads, some of these item types, they get associated with each of these cards. And so, maybe if you're just starting your journey into the data lake workspace industry, if you're just looking at like lake houses for the first time, you may hear this term medallion. Well, you could come here and you could just start with your medallion task flow. So to fully demonstrate like what I'm talking about here, now that I've deleted all the pieces of my pipeline, they're just out here again. And if I asked you like, okay, well, what of these pieces are storing my data when it gets ingested, and where are my embeddings stored? Those types of things. Well, that's why as we create them, we might add them to a task here. So what I'll just do here is I'll go ahead and add not a new item, a task. And so we'll do store data, right? And over here, I'll come and I'll call this, this is going to be my ingested data store. And you see how when I click it, all of the results go away? Well, that's what I mean about these being able to group your items for you, right? So now I'll come in here and I'll say, well, I know that my if I'm going to use a triggered workflow, this and this and this, well, those are actually a part of get data. So let me add a get data here, and then I'll associate those, right? So I'll assign those to the get data task. And I know that my lakehouse right here, that's where I'm storing that ingested data. And that's one of the nice things about a lakehouse is it can store files, not just structured data. So that's key to what we're talking about here with being able to turn unstructured data into something that you can feed to the LLM. Okay, so we'll assign that to ingested data store, assign. And now you can see, like, instead of having to look through everything at once, you hit get data, you get those. You get ingested data store, you get those, right? And basically, I think the way that this was looking is that I had, I don't know, I'll do develop data for, we'll call this run RAG pipeline. And when I was mentioning that you can't really get one-to-one in here, with like an actual workflow like you can in a pipeline is because like the pipeline, for example, it may do things like it's saving its embeddings to SQL Server. And so if we have a task flow item here for the SQL Server, like maybe we have, instead of just ingested data store, we also have this store data that we'll call store vector data, vector embeddings. You know, that's going to come after kind of it's run, but at the same time, you know, you could say that there are steps that come, you know, at each one of these in this pipeline. But it kind of just helps you show that like, hey, there's a natural workflow to the way these things are supposed to go. And then maybe we'll add the similarity search. And another thing that can be really helpful about using these task flows is that each like grouping tries to guide you towards like what type of workload, what type of item is available in there. So if you're getting data and you hit new item, you see it's kind of already got it collapsed to the get data items. And you can always go to all items and you see them all, right? And there's a lot in here. It's getting bigger every day, I feel like. Whereas if you do, yeah, so that's just a great way for you to say like, okay, I know I need to store data. How am I going to store it? Okay, a SQL database. There it is, right? So I probably spent too much time talking about task flows, but I think it's like important to understand like how to use all the pieces of our platform. So, you know, we can keep talking about that if we want, but let's go ahead and move and talking to the actual pipeline here. And to do that, what I'm going to do is rather than diving into what I have built, I'm just going to show you guys what it looks like to start fresh, right? So let's say I want to run this RAG pipeline. If I hit new item, yeah, see, I've got some strange things here. None of these are really what I want. I know it's a part of the get data pipeline, actually, what I'm looking for. So I'm going to just go ahead and do that. And it's right there, pipeline. So, you know, someone mentioned a moment ago, like, oh, Power BI, when we went into the Power BI online service, we had this thing called a data flow. This is not that either. And data flows kind of evolved to become data flow Gen 2. And so this is really where your Power Query Online is, right? And so when you're evaluating, like, I need to get data or I need to transform data, you may only use a data flow Gen 2 because it's very much like the Power BI desktop experience and or the Power Query experience within Power BI desktop. I am so sorry about that. I don't know why I'm getting that error. And but this data flow Gen 2, it's just one way to transform data in Microsoft Fabric. So this is a part of that, like opening up to your Power BI audience, like all these other tools that classic data engineers have been able to get to. The pipeline is more of a way for you to build orchestration where you might use a data flow Gen 2, or you might use a copy job or a notebook, and you might use several of those. But what it allows you to do in the pipeline is to be able to put in some like conditional logic and logging and error checking, things that are lacking from data flow Gen 2. Or from, I should say, from Power Query in Power BI Desktop. So, you know, before we dive and start to focus on the RAG pipeline, like let's just quickly think about like this evolution from Power BI to Microsoft Fabric. You know, when you're in Power BI Desktop and you publish to the service, all you get is that semantic model, and so all of your transformations have to be done in that publish, in that refresh, right? And so that is a great revolution for, you know, for analytics up to a point. But honestly, like to be able to do advanced analytics, you end up having to like do a lot of weird things if all you have is a semantic model, because it's just like one place for data, right? The whole reason that we're breaking things out in Microsoft Fabric into these different stages and to different lakehouses and SQL databases is because it's kind of like now you get a database in the cloud, right? It's kind of like, and I'll just start here by opening up my lakehouse to talk about this. Like you see, you get like files and tables, and this is what the this is what a lakehouse looks like in here. And you can come in here and do a shortcut. Okay, I was expecting to show something else, but that's fine. We'll show the SQL database, I suppose, as well. Right, so you get this database, and so you can put data here. And so like one thing that you might do is like, drop a CSV file in here. And if you do have a CSV file, which of course I didn't manage to have one handy, but let me get it really quickly. You can just come in here and you can upload a file. So let's grab this. Okay, here we go. Just, this lake house, it gives you, you can have a lake house in workspace. And so your users in that workspace, now they have a place to stage data. And so this concept of being able to stage data means that you can ingest like source data, raw data, just let it sit there, and kind of that layer, that like bronze layer in the medallion architecture, is the idea of being able to have that kind of like capturing the changing data. And then you promote that, you start to act on that as you go up to make it ready for reporting. Whereas with Power BI Desktop, you just have to jump right to reporting, right? Like your semantic model is already supposed to be perfect, but no longer in Microsoft Fabric. The whole concept is, hey, let's sync the data into a lakehouse, and then we'll use a pipeline to maybe use 2 or 3 data flows, maybe use some Python notebooks to do whatever we need to with this data to land it in that gold layer. And that end result should oftentimes be a semantic model, so it can be consumed by a report. But you can also leave it in lakehouses and in SQL Database, and you can get that data from Power BI Desktop, Excel, other places. So I'm going to keep jumping around a whole bunch, so please feel free to interrupt me if you'd like. What we were talking about, where that tangent started, because we wanted to create a pipeline, and we wanted to understand like how pipelines fit in to the rest of the features that we may already know from Power BI. So we'll go ahead and do that. Again, I'm going to come in here and create that pipeline. And I'm not going to bother giving it a name, because all I want to show here is how to get started with the RAG template, because it's just right here. This is amazing. So if you're playing around with these tools, like, don't be afraid to do one of these things, right? Like you could start with the pipeline activity, which means you're going to have to choose one of these activities up here. You can do the copy data assistant, which kind of immediately launches you into like, oh, well, is your data in SQL Server? Give me the connection string. And then it'll like give you the tools to just like click through, like as if you were in Power Query almost, to write to that data. And sorry for jumping around so much, but just so many cool things in Microsoft Fabric. I also want to mention, if you haven't used the Dataflow Gen 2, if you haven't used the Power Query Online, like one of the biggest things that's different in Microsoft Fabric is that at the end of your applied steps, you have a destination settings. And so instead of it just publishing right to that semantic model, you can actually publish it to the lakehouse or to a SQL database, or now I'm pretty sure they even have it back to publish to SharePoint. So, that's what we're talking about here with like, what's the purpose of Microsoft Fabric over something just like Power BI is you can stage your data up here. You get all these new built-in tools like this template. So that's what we're going to do is we're on our pipeline. We're going to hit templates. And it's the very first one, right? So reading through these things, you'll probably come up with a million ideas of things that you want to do. But this AI developed RAG pipeline using SQL Database and Fabric, right? So we're going to go ahead and pick that one. We're going to hit next. And you can read through this if you want. This kind of talks about all the stuff, some of the stuff that I'd mentioned. The key thing here is that they have the source files and documentation in GitHub. And you'll find this is very common for Microsoft Learn and for the Microsoft ecosystem. If this isn't something that you've tried to explore before, you can just go to something like this Azure sample here. And so let's go ahead and open that. Okay. You can see lots of stuff in here if you've never been in GitHub. Basically, what you want to do is notice that at the top is a list of files. And this is called like the repository. This is the project repository. It has everything that you'd need for the RAG pipeline, and you could clone it. In fact, that's in their instructions because you'll need some of the files. But it also has our instructions, literally like starting from creating a workspace, and you create your lakehouse, needs you to create a SQL database. So the template, the pipeline template, it doesn't create the things that you need to run the pipeline. It is just the pipeline itself. And so I'll show that again by looking at, once we actually say use this template, we'll just take a look at what it looks like once it gets popped in here. We'll talk about these pieces. It's a good time for us to flip back over to this because, for retrieval augmented generation, what are the steps we actually need to accomplish in order for what that we're about to see in this pipeline? So of course we need to get our data. There's two ways to think about this. What I'm going to demo to start is just having a file in your lakehouse and running the pipeline on that file. The whole goal of this like Azure sample is actually to connect it to an Azure blob storage container and have it triggered when a file lands in that blob storage container. That's a great workflow. I've got a version of it that has the trigger set up so we can see, but it's certainly like one of those things that could be more difficult to set up. And I feel fairly confident that I can guide you through what you need to do here today. And next, after we get that data in, you're going to do something called chunking. And we'll even look at like the code that's doing this. But basically, the concept here is, if you were to pass an entire document to the LLM every time, that is actually called long context. And it's like what happens when you go and you use Copilot and you just load a PDF right into it. You're just feeding it the entire context into one prompt. And that's not the goal of retrieval augmented generation. RAG allows us to pinpoint pieces of information in our data sets. And so in order to do that, we use chunking in order to say like, hey, this piece of embedding, right? Like a concept from our document, in order to semantically understand it, you can't just look at a single word. Sometimes you can't even look at a single sentence, right? Sometimes you need to look at a whole paragraph to get that semantic meaning. And so that's what chunking does for us, is we're about to create our embeddings and we're going to do similarity searches on those embeddings. Well, whatever is in that chunk that gets embedded kind of like talks about a certain level of context. And there's this whole idea of like a chunking strategy that if you're going to implement a retrieval augmented generation pipeline, like you need to understand, like, should my chunks, go every paragraph? Should they go every page? Should I create chunks that like start in one paragraph, finish in the next, and then the next chunk starts back in the first paragraph? So that way I have like overlapping like chunks, right? So that way I'm not missing any opportunity in my similarity search to say, oh yeah, like say I'm searching a resume for someone that's skilled in information systems and also has like an AWS credential, right? If those things are far removed in the document, your embeddings might not have them in the same chunk, right? And so that's why there's this whole idea of like a chunk size. We can probably do that. Okay. So actually, we'll flip back to this screen. Yeah, so we do the chunking. Then one of the things that I love about this pipeline is that it automatically adds a step for us to redact sensitive PII, personal information, personally identifiable information, which is really important, of course, if you're trying to prevent data leakage from getting into a chatbot that you're building, right? Like you want to be able to train on enterprise data, but it'd be great if like, for some reason, if your document that you're trying to extract the text from, if it has a credit card number in it, if it has a social security number, it'd be great if that information, I mean, even names, I'm pretty sure what we're going to use today doesn't even leave names. So that could be a problem. But you know, again, we're just exploring some of the built-in capabilities here. And I'll actually wait to talk more about the PII, because one of the interesting things about this is that, you know, the AI capabilities, they live behind these model endpoints, right? And as we start to get into the redacting PII and actually creating the embeddings, we need to use those model endpoints. And Microsoft is baking those things like more out of the box into Microsoft Fabric. You know, there's something that's in preview called Foundry Data Tools that basically allows you to use the Foundry models built in. There's something called Synapse ML that allows you to run AI functions, like doing the comparisons. And I've got a notebook where we can try to look through that, but time's flying by, so we'll at least just show some of that stuff. My point being there is I'm going to pull up right now Microsoft Foundry, because that's where my models are. And it's something that you don't build in Fabric. I have a feeling the way this is going, they're going to make it very possible for you to not need to go into Foundry anymore. But if your organization needs the ability to manage their own models, like maybe, you know, you can't just like use whatever Fabric's providing. Maybe you want to make sure that you've got it locked down from like a networking and security perspective. Then using the Foundry stuff is still going to be very critical. So let me pull this up here. And so if you've never been in Microsoft Foundry before, this is kind of what it looks like. And this is actually the newest experience. And basically, once you get one of these deployed, this comes with an API key and an endpoint. And you see that you've got like this OpenAI endpoint as well. And when you get your project going in Foundry, well, you get to come in and you get to make models. So you can come in here and you can create an agent. So this is actually like a way that you could use your embeddings. Or you could just say, actually, I'm going to be doing things outside of Foundry. I just need access to a model. And in here, you can deploy a base model, right? And so you can come in here and they literally have all of these models. And, you know, Microsoft is providing these through Foundry. And I think there's like different models that maybe they're hosting as opposed to giving you access to, all things that I'm still trying to figure out. But we're just going to go back to our model that we already have deployed here, because for retrieval augmented generation, there is basically a well-known model called the text embedding 2. Now there's text embedding 3 small. So you go ahead and deploy this, and this is actually, they tell you to use this in their guidance. So if we come back here and we say, okay, here's what we've done so far. We've created the workspace and the lakehouse. We created the SQL database. I know we didn't do it on here, but I can show some of those steps if you like. This step we'll come back to if we have time. User data functions we're going to spend a second on. Basically, they're like preloading, having you create all the things that are going to get put into the pipeline. But if you're just in here exploring, you may have found the RAG pipeline, you may have used the template, and where you're going to end up by doing that is just in this place where you're saying, oh, great, I deployed the template. Okay, now I need to come in here. I need to click on my first step. You know, every one of these steps, these activities, has a general tab and a settings tab. The general tab gives me a place to provide more information, or maybe I don't even want to use that step, right? Like I said, the blob trigger stuff is a whole other thing, so I can just deactivate it. Extract text. How do I extract my text from the documents? Okay, this is still just the general. I'll flip over to settings. Oh, here I start to see where I need to create a user data function, right? Where I need to have a connection here. And this is actually really awesome. If you use Azure Functions, they actually give you the ability to connect to an Azure function too, which is so cool. So I'm going to come back over here. So we'll revisit the creating parts of these. Right now, we've started our pipeline, And so that's, that's where we've done this here. We've started this pipeline, and now we're basically coming in and we're filling out the pipeline. And those things that we're creating are going to get put right here. Okay. So let me see here. Yeah, trunking, redacting, embedding. So yeah, in order to redact the sensitive PII and to do the embeddings and even to do the similarity search, we needed our Microsoft Foundry model here. So you'll find the model text embedding small 3 in our instructions here, where they're telling you to fill things out in the embedding model. They tell you to go ahead and use that one. So that's how you'd know. Otherwise, there's a million models in there. How could you know? But it's good to play. So flip back to Fabric. Okay. So, we need that Foundry information, because even before we start clicking in these, like we know we're going to have to make these, our pipeline itself has things that we need. And they've given us the documentation link here again, in case we didn't have it. They have these variables, right? And so here, this is where we're putting our API key. And this is obviously a pitfall and not something that you should do in a production pipeline, is just have your key sitting here. But that's the way this template is doing it. And because this key needs to get passed into your user data functions, then the user data functions don't support the built-in authentication that you have to the native AI functions. You need a way to handle that API key. And so you probably, in production would use your Azure Key Vault. And then in your notebook, you could actually use your identity to call out to Azure Key Vault and get it in process and get your key while it's processing. And the endpoint, you're also going to get that from here, right? They just give that to you right here. And in this pipeline, this was done before Microsoft Foundry became Microsoft Foundry. It was back, I think it was like Azure Foundry. And cognitive services are like something that's been a part of Azure for a long time. And so the whole OpenAI thing coming into Azure OpenAI, Azure Cognitive Services, they've both found a home in Microsoft Foundry. And so Microsoft Foundry is an important piece to making your data AI ready and to getting the most of Microsoft Fabric. I mean, the cost of the Foundry things compared to the cost of Fabric is nothing. So definitely get started with Microsoft Foundry, unless you are just committed to trying to use the built-in stuff for Azure, which I'll just flip over to and show you real quick. I mean, look at how easy this is. Like, you literally just run an import statement. This is built in to Microsoft Fabric, and you can do things like similarity searches. Like, look at the names of these functions: AI.similarity, AI.classify. These things are cool. I'll try to run them if I can, but I will. We'll keep focusing on the RAG pipeline, and I'll go ahead and drop a link to all those. Have them somewhere. They're definitely there. Okay, doesn't matter. Anyways, so we've created the pipeline. It's sitting here. We need to fill all this stuff out. So I've filled all this out in my pipeline, and I have it ready to just run a single document, right? And so I'll go ahead and jump back over to this one, and we'll go ahead and we'll look through each of these things. So I went ahead and disabled the blob trigger because I wanted the ability to run this on one document at a time. So I disabled that, and that means my extract text, right, is going to use a user data function. It's called the UDF file processor, and the function is called extract text. And so if you haven't started playing with user data functions, an important thing to know is that this is a place where you're going to write code, right? So if you're not ready for that, you might hesitate to go towards a UDF because it's kind of from that more traditional world. However, they try to make it easier. And so I'm actually going to show the UDF right now. My my user data function. And I didn't have to write all this because they have this in the repo. However, it's a pretty regular pattern that they have, so it's great that they have it for us. But basically, the UDF, it's a single file. It's a single like coding file, and it allows us to extract the text here, to generate the texts here, or generate the chunks here. See, so we have these different functions within our user data function. I'm going to show that off in a second, but it's code. So if you can't read code, this is actually a better way to look at it. But it gives us a way to like write one file that has all of the different functions that we need to run, right? So that's what's happening here. And you can see the niceness of a pipeline is it gives us the ability to say like, okay, well, were we able to actually extract anything? Great, then we'll keep proceeding. If not, maybe what we'll do is it's gone. But I think out of the box, it comes to send an email, right? Doesn't matter. Okay, let's take a look at that user data function. So if you're in your workspace here and you go new item, there's this thing called the user data function. Author, host, and manage serverless user data functions optimized for Fabric. And I've had a lot of gotchas with user data functions, but this is what it looks like. And so this is Python. So if you're not familiar with Python, writing this and modifying it in the ways that I have might not be simple, right? And so that's obviously like a barrier here, but it is cool that like they're providing us with like just this general guidance, because what you see here at the top is like, look at what's available to us in Microsoft Fabric. In some places, you're going to see in this code that I have to reach out to the cognitive services endpoint, right? And so that's where we're using stuff like the text analytics, right? And the document analysis. They have these things for us to literally recognize documents and extract stuff from them built in here. It's when we need to do our embeddings, generate embeddings, that's when we have to go out to the OpenAI endpoint, because that wasn't a part of the cognitive services. At least that's my understanding of why they've decided to split it in two different places. So yeah, you can think this text analytics client, it's a little bit different than actually reaching out to the OpenAI endpoint, which is still in Azure. So maybe a slight point that's hard to capture or grasp, but if I flip back to here, like you can kind of see what's the page I wanted. I was like, that can't be right. I don't want to show you keys and endpoints, but I do. I wanted to show you down here, this Foundry, OpenAI. So, this is more kind of where the Azure AI services have been around a long time, right? And so you get all of these things with your Foundry project. You get the ability to do this. And if you ever accidentally show a key or you need to refresh it, this is where you're going to go in to do that. So this is, you have to, at least right now, you have to go back into Azure to do that. Well, maybe you could edit it from here. I'm not going to try that now. Anyways. So one of the things I like about these user data functions, it's the ability for us to write these snippets of code, so we can collapse these. and they get decorated here. And we define them as the UDF function. And you have this concept. There's two really important things with user data functions here. So the first thing is we have our function explorer, right? And so we can go to each of these and you can even test them, which is so cool. I really like this, this experience. But more importantly is you have to be able to have connections and you have to have library management. So this is a big piece of any AI project is the library management. I'm going to start with manage connections because you see those connections defined right here where they say arg name, right? And so if you manage connections, this is where you can come in and you actually just, find in your OneLake catalog where when it says this alias of LHRAG demo, where does it reach into? Oh, it goes to my lakehouse. And then, so that's what allows you to, like, in this create table, this one's pointing to the SQL database. It's literally running a create table statement. So if you know SQL, that probably looks familiar, right? And so where's that happening? It's happening in that SQL database defining the connection. In other places, in this chunk text, for example, right, we're using tick token. And where is tick token? We're importing it, but tick token isn't a native thing in Microsoft Fabric. It lives in library management. And so this is also something that you're going to start doing as you're managing AI projects, is you may come in here and you may need to add in like that form recognizer or the text analytics or tick token. So that's how you get that stuff. And if you need to, it actually can create this library for you that you can then take and use in other notebooks and whatnot, right? So we're talking about managing a library. We manage the versions here, and maybe we allow other users to use them too. So that way they don't have to do all these steps. The important thing to know. Okay. Yeah. And back to the UDF, right? So, yeah, so like I used this test over here quite a bit. For example, I had a ton of issues just using the out of the box like way they have this set up to even just extract the text from my files. And I ended up having to do this, which I have no idea if this is good or bad practice, but I had to do it because I couldn't reach out to the endpoint while it had that thing in there. Don't need to go down that rabbit hole. Either way, doing that worked. And yeah, so I'll just quickly go through here to kind of talk about what's happening. We're going into our document analysis client. This is reaching into the cognitive services endpoint or into the Foundry endpoint. We're using that API key that I created, connecting to the lakehouse, right? We're downloading the file from the lakehouse, right? So there needs to be a file in the lakehouse. And so this is a good opportunity for us to jump over to lakehouse. I mentioned that I uploaded these things. And then one of the things I wanted to show about like the features of lakehouses and whatnot was if you upload like say a CSV, you can just click it and you can do what's called load to tables. And so this kind of is supposed to bring full circle to that idea I said about like, oh, well, in Microsoft Fabric, each of your teams gets their own database. And so that's kind of a way that happens is because you can actually upload your files, you can promote it to a table, and then once it gets that schema, you can do regular operations on it, like SQL, you can load it into the Fabric data agent and make it accessible in that way. So pretty cool stuff, but we're not actually loading to tables in our instance here. What we're actually going to do is we're going to use these files in our pipeline here, right? And so I went ahead and I created a parameter, file name to process. So all you need to do is give it the name of the file. But I bring that up because I had to use this test on extract text a bunch because it kept telling me it couldn't find the file. And what I eventually had to find out is that you only need to give it the file name. If you're in a lakehouse, this can be an important thing to figure out, is how do I get access to this file? Well, depending on where you're at, you might need like a full URL. You might be able to use a relative path. And so that's what I was doing. I was using the relative path because I connected my lakehouse. But if you have files on there, it doesn't work. So you just need the file name. That was a gotcha for me. And so let's try to run this right now on one of these. So I don't have Chef Dr. Julian here run through here yet. So we'll just go ahead and grab that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and run. It's going to ask for the file name to process. That's the default value. I'm going to change it to that, and I'm going to hit OK. And so now we can finally see like what it actually looks like to run a pipeline in here. I think we're approaching our time, but we'll at least see the pipeline work. I'll show off some of the rest of the pieces of this as that's running. But as you can see, like you get this really great experience here where you can see your output of each of these steps, and you can kind of get more information if something goes wrong. So we'll return to that. But in the meantime, I'll come back to this UDF. Just trying to think about if there's anything else I wanted to show here. Oh, you do have to publish the UDF in order for it to be able to be used. But once you have that, that's when in your pipeline you can come back in here and you can say, okay, my user data function's right here. It sees that I have that file, and I can pick my function, right, for extract text. So that's what I'm doing there, and do the same for generate chunks, do the same for redact PII. And then when we get to the actual generate embedding step, that's calling out to the OpenAI endpoint. It generates the embeddings, and we're going to store them in SQL Server because SQL Server now has native support for the vector embeddings, and it's also a great place where we can just run similarity searches on them before thinking about like, okay, how do we feed this back to an LLM, which that would be like a part 2 of this talk, where once you've got your embeddings generated and created, you need a way to use them. I'm going to try to very quickly show off like what it might look like for you to just run a SQL query in here against them. But ultimately, once they live in SQL Server, you can do all sorts of cool things like create a GraphQL API, which can be exposed through the Fabric MCP. So that way, basically, you can like create GraphQL commands the Fabric MCP can give to an external agent. And so basically what that means is you can do something like have these create the embeddings, do your similarity searches, and return those values to an external LLM through that methodology. And in the Fabric Data Agent experience, you can even, once you've created your embeddings, you just can connect to them, because now at the very least, you've chunked your text. You see the embeddings column doesn't show up in here. Fabric Data Agents don't have a way of reading those embeddings right now, but you could just feed it text once you've already got it extracted. So, there's a bit of where do you start? What do you use? They're definitely making things so much easier now that if you already have like a momentum going and like a pipeline that's doing retrieval augmented generation, you may find that it's just easier to do it in the new way that Fabric's providing, like by using a Fabric Data Agent, not going all the way through creating embeddings. I'm still determining like for the Fabric Data Agent if that's necessary or not. Certainly, if you want to implement a mechanism where it doesn't have to read all of the data, right? If you want it to be able to guide an LLM to find specific pieces of content based on that similarity search, that's when the retrieval augmented generation is absolutely still necessary. And as we saw with that giant, how does Copilot work? It's kind of doing that in the background for you. So some of this stuff you don't really have to do anymore. But when it comes to the unstructured data, I think there's still a reason to do that. So let's go ahead and check out how our pipeline ran. Hopefully it finished, and it did succeed. Great. So you can come through here and you can kind of see that we extracted the text, we generated the chunks, redacted the PII, generated the embeddings, and then we saved the data. Okay. So what that means is we can come back in here. We can look at that table that I created, the documents, and so we'll run this, and these bottom two lines are what just came through. And we'll just do a select star. I had it that way because what you're going to see here is that, we have our document. It has these embeddings. So when I talk about it being like a vector embedding, this is what it means. It's a vector representation. And then you've got your text there. And so you can do something like a similarity search in here. So for example, this stored procedure creates embeddings based on a prompt, tries to find the top K chunks from your documents. It does this vector distance. This I don't think is working in my query, but since we only have a few records, we don't necessarily need it. We might even be able to fake it, but I'll just write this here. Like, let's say information systems, right? And so we're trying to find one of these that has, we see it right there, right? So we can run. And the score is supposed to do a better job of telling you what's close, but the way that they have this written isn't working, which I didn't have time to debug. But regardless, basically the idea here is that there's this similarity, this like vector distance that's done between information systems, right? And we can actually do, it's too close to the end to do anything like that. But it does this similarity search, and then it might say, okay, I found information systems in this one, so that's what I'll return. And I tried to like demonstrate that with the Fabric data agent. It did say that it was able to find that candidate, right? But when I tried to ask it further questions that I knew were in the chunk, it didn't work. So that's kind of something I'm still trying to figure out. Regardless, I know I've shown so much today, but I really did just kind of want to showcase like all these things that are possible in Microsoft Fabric. And we've got our pipeline completed, and I thought about trying to go through and like talk to you guys about the triggers to do the blob storage, because it really does show that there's this compelling story about how you can do event-driven architectures in Microsoft Fabric. Like I just ran this one off. But that's not necessarily, the way you would put something in production. So being able to like create an event stream and have activator watching an Azure Blob storage container, so that way when a file lands there from say like an application process where like the resumes end up landing, it automatically triggers this. They get generated, your embeddings live there, and then you can do your similarity search to try and find the person that you're looking for. And I know, we're looking at demo data, and we're, not looking at the end result of feeding this into the LLM, which is where things get really interesting. But at the end of the day, we've accomplished in, going in, we've gone into our workspace, we talked about the task flows, we talked about like what a pipeline was and how that compares to all of our different types of transformation activities, or different tasks. We went into the pipeline. We showed how in each one of these steps, sometimes it calls for a notebook, sometimes it calls for a user data function. You could have a step that worked for a data flow, and then you could insert Power Query in here. But it really highlights the native built-in features of AI, or of the AI features within Fabric, how easy it is to connect them to things like you're using your lakehouses, you're using your SQL databases. Now that my SQL Server is able to store those vector embeddings, you have a natural home for them. You can really start doing a lot of things in Microsoft Fabric on top of what it's already doing to help with just looking at your semantic models and looking at your databases and whatnot. If you have your unstructured data, you might consider doing the retrieval augmented generation, just using the built-in pipeline to create those embeddings. At the very least, what you're going to end up with is your ability to have your text, right? And so we're seeing that there's a way to do the document intelligence built into Microsoft Fabric. And what you do with the data after that is, what we're all figuring out. But the ability to actually get it into our analytics pipeline and processed, that's what we're talking about. So I know I've shown a lot today, and I didn't necessarily go through like much of this at all. I should call out, I talked about the Fabric data agents, I talked about Foundry, Copilot Studio. If you have a Microsoft 365 Copilot premium license, you have access to Copilot Studio. And one of the reasons I brought up the whole like GraphQL and the Fabric MCP and even Fabric data agents now, all of those can be connected into Copilot Studio. And so if you have users that are in Microsoft 365 Copilot, they can see an agent that you have created in there and say it's like, I've trained these agents to be able to use the Fabric data agent and to also use my embeddings that I've generated from these documents. And so now you have an agent that's able to talk across both structured and unstructured data. So that works especially well if you already have like a footprint in Power Automate and stuff, because your tooling there, you can just kick off a Power Automate job. So a lot of common pitfalls I mentioned: securely managing your API key, connections go stale. So if your password changes, the next time that you visit this, you may need to go in and reestablish those connections. I mentioned how hard it was to make sure that the file names and the model endpoints need to be named correctly. And if you do go towards trying to put this into production and have your trigger going, well, you need to make sure that your tenant is registered to handle the Microsoft.event grid. So that's a resource provider in Azure. Just want to make sure I provide all this information to you guys if you decide to go through and get an AI summary of it. So yeah, start experimenting. I tried to show you the places that you can go to use this stuff. Some of it has some coding, but at the very least, the next time the boss comes down and says like, why aren't we doing stuff in AI? Say, oh, we have Microsoft Fabric. There's AI all over it, and we can do anything you want in it right now, today. And jump in there and show them. Wow. So that was my goal for showing you this potentially complicated topic, but AI is everywhere. Maybe you've heard of the term of RAG. Hey, did you know you can do it in Microsoft Fabric? There's tons of stuff we can do in here.